These are some of the most evil serial killers from around the world that you've probably never heard of. We're starting with Alexander Pichushkin, otherwise known as the Chessboard Killer. You'll see how he earned that name in a minute. As a child, Alexander was pretty normal. Maybe a bit introverted, but other than that, nothing was off. Until one day, when he fell off a swing and he hit his head in such a way that his prefrontal cortex was permanently damaged, which somehow managed to create a pattern of aggression within him as a child that continued until he was an adult. But apparently, with this traumatic brain injury, he also gained an insane aptitude for chess, because the kid was a chess prodigy. His grandfather taught him how to play, and he just completely took off from there. Alexander managed to channel his aggression into the game, but apparently not well enough, because he also found a passion for something else. That something else, of course, being murder. He would invite his chess opponents out into the park for a drink. Then once they got there, he would smash the backs of their heads with a bottle. He stated that he had the goal of killing exactly 64 people, which is exactly how many squares are on a chessboard. Insanely psychopathic stuff. You can see how insane he was by one of his quotes. For me, life without murder is like life without food for you. I felt like the father of all these people, since it was me who opened the door for them into another world. Which is just an incomprehensibly absurd thing to say. Murder is like food for you. You can live without murdering other people. It's perfectly reasonable. Luckily, this maniac was locked up for life in 2007 after a security camera picked him up walking around with one of his victims just hours before her death. Next up is William Unek. William was a police constable from Africa. Evidently, he was not a very good police constable because he made it into this list. In the year 1954, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, William went on a killing spree. Using just an axe, he managed to kill 21 people in 90 minutes, which is just completely insane. But it only gets worse from there. William wasn't done, and after escaping to a different territory, he got his hands on a rifle, 50 rounds of ammo, and an axe. From there, he settled down and surrendered. As if. He started a second murdering spree, and within 12 hours, he managed to kill a total of 36 people. Knowing he would soon be apprehended, he changed out of his constable's uniform and into clothes that he stole from one of his victims. And unfortunately, he did manage to escape. And at that point, the government began a manhunt. They hunted for the dude for 9 days with just no clue about where he'd gone. They eventually caught him inside the house of one of his friends who'd called the police. The friend managed to hold a conversation with the murderer for 2 full hours until the police arrived, at which point they chucked a smoke bomb into the house, which set it on fire. William was really badly burned in the fire, and he later on just died in the hospital. And the friend, well, he got $156 along with what's called the British Empire Medal, which is, good, I guess. I mean, you'd think he'd get a slightly bigger reward, like maybe $157, but who am I to question the government? Wait, if you made it this far into the video, subscribe, please. Anyway, alright, next we got the Green River Killer. But for the purposes of this video, I'm going to call him by his real name, Gary, because he doesn't deserve a cool nickname. This serial killer was active in Seattle around the year 1982. He earned his name due to his first 5 victims, whose bodies were all found in the Green River, which is a huge river inside of Washington. Throughout the 80s and 90s, Gary murdered, at minimum, 71 different people, generally women and girls. He would lure them in and then show them a picture of a son to gain their trust, etc. And then, once he had them in a private location, he would end their lives and hide the bodies. 71 is a completely absurd number of murders. Due to that high amount of victims, surely he would have been caught pretty early on, right? Well, Gary had been a suspect in these cases for a long time. The police had suspected him since the 1980s, but they had no concrete evidence to prove that he did any of it, so they were just completely powerless. But luckily, they were able to get some DNA samples for him, and no less than 14 years later, after DNA profiling had gotten infinitely better, they were finally able to connect him to the killings. But they only had him for 7. Fortunately, those 7 murders would have earned him the death sentence. But, plot twist, he entered into a plea deal. As part of the deal, he confessed to 48 other murders and helped to locate the bodies. The result? 48 life sentences without the chance of parole, plus an additional 480 years for tampering with evidence. He most likely will not be able to outlive those sentences. Sucks to suck, Gary. But next up is an example of how some serial killers are insanely methodical and precise with their actions. This is Israel Keyes, a serial killer inside the US. This guy was a serial killer that enjoyed what you'd call the thrill of the kill. He would plan his murders months in advance and would travel thousands of miles to specific locations. Once he got there, he would have his tools already hidden and prepared. This guy was insane. Like, for one of his murders, he flew to Chicago, rented a car, and drove another 1,000 miles to Vermont before doing his thing. The really interesting thing about this guy as a serial killer was that he didn't kill a specific type of person. Most serial killers pick a profile, a persona that they target specifically. But not Israel. He didn't care about anything like that. He enjoyed the murder for the murder. The strange thing is that while he wasn't very low key and wasn't very dramatic with his murders, he was also actively trying to be unique. He would study other serial killers, and he committed his murders in such a way that he would never be compared to another serial killer because he was so original in a twisted way. But since I would just love to disrespect him, I found an article on cvltnation.com talking about how he is similar to Ted Bundy. Quote, they were both heavy drinkers, methodical, intelligent, felt some possession over their victims, and operated in multiple US states. So, a loser. The way he was caught was also quite interesting. So after killing one of his victims, he actually tricked the family into thinking that they were still alive, and managed to get $50,000 deposited into the victim's account for him to access. But unbeknownst to him, the US government was made aware, and they immediately began tracking him as he withdrew from the account in banks around the country. But in the end, he was arrested because he drove a little too fast over the speed limit, got recognized, and was promptly arrested in the parking lot of a Cotton Patch Cafe in Texas. Loser again. Next is Yang Jinhai, a Chinese serial killer. This man was the definition of psychopathic. The trouble started when he was about 20 years old. In 1988 to 1991, Yang was sentenced to Chinese labor camps as punishment for stealing. If you aren't aware, those places were absolutely brutal. Then, in 1996, he was given another 3 years in prison for an assault. And immediately when he got out, his killing spree began. Yang's MO was to sneak into his victims' houses at night, and then to murder all the occupants. Sometimes that meant he would kill entire families using a wide variety of tools. This was a man who didn't care how he got the job done as long as he managed to kill them. And the thing is, he wasn't an idiot either. Each time he would wear different shoes and change clothes to avoid suspicion. Okay, so he was clearly an evil human being, but what was his motive? Well, apparently, it was revenge against society. Revenge for the time he spent in work camps, and revenge for a particularly bad breakup. Yep, all this was about a relationship that went sour. 67 murders because his girlfriend broke up with him. Yep, that'll get her back. Dummy. Also, as a serial killer, naturally, he has his own dumb quote. Listen to this. When I killed people, I had a desire. This inspired me to kill more. I don't care whether they deserve to live or not. It is none of my concern. I have no desire to be part of society. Society is not my concern. Like, okay, why not just not be part of society? It's not that complicated. He's acting like he only had one option here. Turns out that serial killing doesn't discriminate. It doesn't discriminate by victim or by killer, apparently, because our next serial killer is Dorothea Helen Puente, a serial killer from the United States who happened to be an old woman. Her strategy was a little different to the rest because she didn't murder out of the evil of her heart. Well, no, she actually absolutely murdered out of the evil of her heart, but that wasn't the primary motive. Her goal the whole time seemed to be making as much money as possible, and she did that by targeting the elderly. She was known to help out elderly people by letting them live with her, but the whole time she would be reading all their mail and stealing their money. But you already know that that wasn't the end of it. It gets so much worse. She would entice elderly people to move in with her. Then once they'd been living with her for a while, and she'd stolen a bunch of money from them, she'd kill them and then keep taking their pension checks as they slowly came in. She did this whole thing a bunch of times until she eventually got caught. This was an evil woman. She actually tried to manipulate people into seeing her as more innocent by wearing old clothes, letting her hair turn gray, and wearing huge glasses. Which clearly worked at least a little bit, given how successful she was in the time that she operated. But luckily, she got eventually. When they caught her, they found 7 bodies belonging to different elderly people buried in her yard. She would eventually get sentenced to life in prison, dying at the age of 82. Good riddance. Next, we have a serial killer that is somehow less sane than Dorothea. Meet Leonarda Cianciulli. So when Leonarda was a child, her dream was to have many children. So she visited a fortune teller. That fortune teller was apparently a bit of a jerk, because she said that while Leonarda would have many children, every single one of them would die. Great, well, Leonarda must have walked out of there and disregarded that statement entirely, right? Ha. She believed that fortune teller in their entirety. And sure enough, she would end up losing 10 of her 14 children. But that's not even the craziest part, because that's not why she's in this video. Here's where the serial killing begins. Her favorite remaining child, a kid named Giuseppe, was drafted into World War II. And when that happened, Leonardo went ballistic. She looked for any possible way to save him, and apparently the most reasonable way to go about that was, human sacrifice. Sure. She ended up baiting 3 different women into her home and then fed them poisoned food. And then, and I'm not making this up, she would turn them into cake and even soap. She would then give that stuff to her neighbors, and they, of course, would have no idea that these products were made of their friends, which is just so insanely messed up to think about. The thought process that goes into this is just incomprehensible. How do you think that turning people into soap will save your son from being drafted into the military? This just shows you how completely depraved these people were. I have no sympathy for any of them. Leonardo served 30 years in prison before dying, and the world was a better place for it. Next up is Salvatore Perone, otherwise known as the Son of Sal. And damn it, why do serial killers get such cool names? You know, I refuse to call him that. I'm calling him Sally. Sally was a failed businessman in Brooklyn. Apparently, he was completely fed up with life because he would wander the streets with a bag full of deadly weapons just looking for suspects. His targets were all people from the Middle East, and they would all be business owners. Sally would walk into businesses around closing time and open fire on the people inside. His numbers aren't as high as other people on this list, but I still felt like adding him due to how random his case seemed. There was no motive that anyone could find. It wasn't a robbery of any sort, no money was ever stolen from any victim, nobody could figure it out, and they still can't to this day. When this case was taken to court, it took the jury literally 30 minutes to decide that he was guilty. The judge even said that he was lucky that New York didn't have the death sentence because he would absolutely be heading straight for the guillotine or electric chair or needle, whatever it is nowadays. This guy was a complete moron. He requested to represent himself, a request that was denied because he was known to randomly begin yelling in court, which did not lead to any sort of order. Fortunately, the prosecution had videos, DNA, fingerprints, and telephone records, all proving exactly what he did. Dude got 75 years. Kind of a fool. Also, I have a Discord server now. One random person who joins in the first week will show up in a video. Scan this QR code or click the link in the pinned comment to join. Or watch this video over here.